Avid again, and hello, it's Fo, and welcome to Magic Mondays. Last week we went over acquiring the digital product Magic Jewels, and we had a look at the first mission in the story campaign for Gideon, which gave us an example of a typical game played with a white deck. In Magic the Gathering there are 5 colours available to us: white using plains, blue using islands, black using swamps, red using mountains, and green using forests. If we go into our card collection in Jewels, it should load up all the cards that we have available, and then we can filter those cards by clicking on the icon up at the top so we can have a look at each colour individually. As you can see, we also have the option to filter by set. Now we can see all our white cards together, and we can use the arrows to flick through the collection and have a look at all the white cards that we have. Underneath it shows us how many copies we have of each card. If we zoom into any card, we can see it in more detail. So this is Lone Rider, a white creature card with 1 power and 1 toughness. Its converted mana cost is 2, being 1 of any colour and 1 white. It has the abilities First Strike and Lifelink. Also, at the beginning of our end step, if we've gained 3 or more life this turn, we get to transform Lone Rider. On the right, it has an information box describing all of these abilities, so if we're unsure about what transforming is, about what First Strike is, or about what Lifelink is, then we can click on the boxes on the right hand side and it will give us a description. Basically, the transform ability means that we flip the card over because it is a double-faced card. If we click the flipping icon here, we can see the reverse of the card. Lone Rider, once transformed into It That Rides as 1, is a 4/4 with First Strike and Lifelink, but also gains the ability Trample. We can see in the information box Trample has been added, just in case we don't know what that means. If we look, Lifelink is defined as damage dealt by something with lifelink also causes its controller to gain that much life. Trample is defined as if a creature with trample would deal enough combat damage to its blockers to destroy them, it deals the remainder of its damage to the defending player. Attacking and blocking creatures with First Strike deal their damage before creatures that do not have First Strike. So if the 1/1 attacker with First Strike is blocked by even a 10/1 blocker, then that First Strike creature will do the damage and kill that 10/1 blocker before that blocker gets a chance to do the 10 damage back and kill our creature. Lone Rider's abilities and its creature type human show up in many white decks. Another common creature type in white decks is the creature type Angel. Angels are almost always flying and usually cost a little bit more than the cheaper soldiers because they have greater abilities and a greater power and toughness. When this Angel comes into play, if we have less life than our opponent, we get to gain 5 life, and if we have fewer creatures than our opponent, we get to make a token creature, which is another flyer. Creating tokens and gaining life are also very common features of a white deck. Enchantments that must be placed on creatures, auras, are also common in white. White auras tend to favour toughness over power. Always Watching is a global enchantment, meaning it affects all of the guys on our side, and all of our non-token creatures get +1/+1, and then they get Vigilance. And we can see over at the side in our information box, Vigilance means that our creatures don't tap when they attack, so they're still available to block on our opponent's turn. In white we have sorceries like Declaration in Stone that will help us to exile some of the creatures on our opponent's side. When our opponent's creatures are destroyed, either by spells or in combat, They go to our opponent's graveyard, but with exiling, we remove them from the game instead. That way they can't be brought back from our opponent's graveyard later in the game. I'll show you an example of this when we get to the black cards. White instants often gain life or are used as combat tricks to either make our opponent sacrifice their attacking creatures or to protect our creatures so they survive the combat. We'll have a look at some blue cards now. Both merfolk and wizards are both common creature types in blue. This creature is both the merfolk and a wizard. We can cast the Harbinger of Tides as normal on our turn for 2 blue mana, but it also has an ability that we can pay 2 more and cast it as though it had flash. As you see, creatures with flash can be played at any time an instant could be played, so if your opponent has a 3/3 and a 1/1 say, and they're attacking you, if you have 4 available mana, including 2 blue, you can flash the Harbinger of Tides into play. It will bounce the bigger creature back to your opponent's hand, and then you're still able to block with your Harbinger of Tides to block the smaller creature and kill it. Disrupting your opponent's plans and controlling the game is what blue magic is all about. In blue, auras are often designed to be played on your opponent's creatures. A common effect is to stop the creature from untapping on our opponent's turn, and that way it can't be declared as an attacker against us. One way blue likes to maintain control is by maintaining card advantage. Having more cards than our opponent increases the chances of having answers to all their threats. As we saw with the Harbinger of Tides, blue likes to return the opponent's permanents back to their hand, causing them to have to choose whether they want to play them again, putting them back a turn essentially. And this is known as a tempo play, putting your opponent back a turn so you can take advantage. The Jessian Thief's great for blue decks. It's a 1/3 that costs 3 to cast. It has prowess, and whenever you deal combat damage to a player, you get to draw a card. As I've said, blue always wants to draw more cards, maintain that advantage. And the prowess is great because most of the cards in our deck will be non-creature spells. Instants, sorceries, artifacts, enchantments, planeswalkers, all of these things will trigger prowess, and in the late game you might be able to do it multiple times on the same turn. Blue's best disruption is the counter spell. If your opponent plays a spell, and you have the available mana, you can reply to it at instant speed with a counter spell. A spell that gets countered can't resolve, and is immediately put into the graveyard. All non-land permanents when they're being played are spells, so the counter spell can get in the way of whatever your opponent is trying to do. Let's have a look at some black cards now. Many black creatures are horror based, like vampires and zombies. This vampire, the Asylum Visitor, has a special ability that if at the start of each player's turn that player has no cards in hand, then we get to draw a card at the cost of 1 life. Just like in blue, this generates card advantage, but we have to pay life for the effect. Like we saw in white, the ability Lifelink appears on some black vampires. Lifelink applies whether the creature is attacking or blocking. Whenever the creature deals any damage to any creature or player, we gain that much life. The Gifted Aetherborn here has another ability, Death Touch. If the Gifted Aetherborn deals combat damage to a creature, that creature is destroyed. Destroying your opponent's creatures is Black's speciality. With the right cards, you could remove creatures from the first turn all the way up to the 5th turn. Necromancy is also popular in black. As we destroy our opponent's creatures, we can bring our own creatures back from our graveyard to fight for us all over again. Just like in white, we also have cards that let us remove our opponent's creatures from the game entirely. Discard is also a popular effect in black. Unburden here will force our opponent to discard 2 of the cards from their hand. Now we'll have a look at some of the red cards. Like in blue, we find creatures with prowess because red plays a lot of non-creature spells. Much like in white, blue and black, in red we have flying creatures. These are commonly dragons and phoenixes that can rise back from the graveyard when certain conditions are met. This creature also has the ability Haste, which is quite common among red creatures. Haste means that the creature is unaffected by Summoner's Sickness and it can attack the turn that it's played. Red decks are often played quite aggressively, with the creatures attacking every turn. Some red spells will let you gain control of your opponent's creatures for a turn, give them haste, and then attack in. Many other red spells do what is known as direct damage. This spell, Blazing Volley, does 1 damage to each creature your opponents control. Much like in combat, this will kill any creatures that have only 1 toughness. The best direct damage spells let you do the damage to either a creature or a player. Exquisite Firecraft does 4 damage, and if you have Spell Mastery, meaning if you already have 2 instants or sorceries in your graveyard before playing this spell, then this spell is uncounterable. So even if you're facing the blue player that has a counterspell in their hand, they could do nothing about it. As with the black removal spells, they start at only 1 mana, and many can be played at instant speed. Other red spells include aggressive combat tricks that help your creatures do as much damage as fast as possible, and spells that let you draw more cards to replenish your hand, much like in blue. Often, like with Cathartic Reunion here, we have to discard cards in order to draw more. Last but not least, we're going to look at some green cards. Green creatures tend to be the strongest, having the greatest power and toughness. Many of the smaller creatures have mana abilities, meaning that you can tap them to gain extra mana so you can play your more expensive spells earlier. Common in green are sorceries or instants that let you go looking for more land to bring into the battlefield on your side to help you then cast spells again, which cost a little bit more. Green is the only colour in which there are no creatures with flying. Some green creatures have the ability Reach, which means they can block creatures with flying. Much like in white or in black, green gives us options to gain life too. Jadi Offshoot's landfall ability means that whenever we bring a land into play on our side, whether it's our natural land per turn or through a spell like Explosive Vegetation, then we gain 1 life back. The ability Defender means that this creature can't attack, it's essentially a wall. Nissa's Renewal is an example of a rare sorcery that does both looking for 3 lands and gains us 7 life back. If we have the Jadi Offshoot in play when these 3 lands come into play, of course that's another 3 life that we gain. Like in black, some spells will let us get cards back from our graveyard. This one, Pulsum Murasa, also gains us another 6 life. Although there aren't any spells in green that can directly destroy creatures on our opponent's side, we can use creature abilities and spells on our side to destroy their artifacts and enchantments. As we've seen in the other colours, there are plenty of instant speed combat tricks that we can also play in green. And that's a tour through the colours. Next week we'll have a look at deck building. And until then, have a good one.